Let's take a look at the composition of trig functions with inverse trig functions. There are 6 examples that I'd like to take a look at, and they all involve a slightly different aspect of this process. The first one, and the first and second really, are both pretty basic, and so let's take a look at each of these in turn. So for number 1, we're given the same function, sine and sine inverse, and in general, if I have a function composed with its inverse, those two are sort of opposite processes. So in general, that will just return the input. So if I plug x into f inverse and then apply f to that, the two functions, they undo each other and we just get x, because the idea here, of course, is that if I have a function f and an inverse function f inverse, the first function takes an input value and gives me an output value, and the second function takes it back to where we started. So if I start and take this input into the inverse, I go here and then take that function and we get back to where we started. There's one aspect for inverse trig functions that becomes a little bit complicated here, so we need to think about, is this a valid ratio? I know that it represents a ratio because it's getting plugged into the inverse sine function. So inverse sine is going to take a ratio and return an angle, and then the sine function is going to return the ratio. So this is basically saying what angle gives me a sine ratio of negative 0.2, and then the sine of that angle is going to give me a sine ratio of negative 0.2. So the only issue is that maybe this would not be a valid ratio. It is, and so it is a valid ratio, and so we simply get sine of sine inverse of negative 0.2 is equal to negative 0.2. But if it wasn't valid, then it would just be undefined. So what I mean by that, a second problem, suppose we had sine of sine inverse of 7. There's no way that I could get 7 from a sine function. There's no angle that if I plug that angle into the sine function, it would give me 7. And so this is just undefined. Right? Sine ratios, sine of theta, that expression is always going to be between 1 and negative 1. And so there's no way that I can apply sine to some angle and get 7. So this is not equal to 7. Well, let's take a look at number 2.